Hey guys, and today we're going to do the very first story time on this channel. So, as many of you know from the update videos, I quit my job recently. Now here's the problem with that: I loved my job. I mean, I really did. It's one of those jobs that I fell into that I didn't really understand that I wanted it until I was working in it, and then I realized that I loved my job. I went into work every day. I loved the work that I did, and that I basically had a fantastic job, my dream job, and I quit. And as many of you know, my job was a video game development teacher. So I taught programming, 3D modeling, animation, and actually many of the videos on my channel are from my time as a teacher. So why did I quit? Honestly, I could talk to you guys about how teachers are vastly underpaid and underappreciated, and I could talk to you about a couple of the crazy parents that I had, or even some of the worst students that I taught. But those are kind of overdone, and while those did play a part into why I quit teaching, ultimately, the story behind why I eventually quit my dream job goes a lot deeper than just those three topics. So I'm going to tell you guys the story of why I went from loving my job to dreading going to work, and why I eventually quit my dream job. So to help you guys understand why I quit my dream job, I have to help you understand why I fell in love with it in the first place. So I love to teach. It's been a part of who I am since I was like 5 years old. I knew from that age that I was going to be some type of teacher. And that's held pretty true, actually. I love to teach people just about anything, especially if it's something that I'm excited about. So when I got this job straight from college, because I didn't have any clue what I was going to do, and one of my old teachers actually called me back up and said, "Hey, you have a degree. We need a teacher that can teach computer science. Will you come back and teach for just a year and give us kind of a break year?" And I said, well, I don't really have that much experience. I just did it in high school, but sure. You know, I have nothing else going on. I don't know what else I'm going to do. So yeah, I'll come back. I'll teach for 1 year and then we'll call it done. Well, halfway through my first year, I realized I'm going to do this for a while. I enjoy teaching, and I enjoy teaching programming. So, you know, this is good. This is a good mix for me. I didn't realize this about myself, but I like it. And then they hired a dude from Amazon, an old guy. He talked a lot. Many of my students know exactly who I'm talking about, but they hired this dude from Amazon, and he was a brilliant programmer. He could definitely program for loops around me and every other computer science teacher at the school. So they said, you know what, we're going to give him the advanced programming classes, kind of let him run that show since he's got the experience. No problem. That makes sense. But I was hired as a programming teacher, so what am I going to do now? Well, there was this program at the school for video game development. It wasn't called that, but that's basically what it was. And it was just kind of doing nothing. It wasn't really meeting the state requirements. It wasn't actually producing any work of any quality, and basically the students understood that if you were in that program, you did absolutely nothing. You just played games every class. The teacher was kind of a joke. So basically it was like the class that all of the kind of low performing students wanted to get into because they just didn't want to do any additional work. Now, one of the cool things about the school that I was at was that it was one of the best. It was one of the best schools in Florida. And it was all magnet, so nobody was just going there. Everybody had to apply. Unfortunately, it was all lottery system to get in, but once you were in, everybody took AP classes and IB classes, and it was not unusual. In fact, it was pretty common for students to leave this school and have a year to a year and a half done of their college due to all of the AP and IB credits that students were taking and the dual enrollment that we offered. And so I looked at everything that was going on in the school and I said, well, this program isn't really meeting the school's standard for education. It's kind of moving along and nobody's really doing anything with it. So sure, you're going to give the advanced programming to the Amazon guy. Absolutely, that's fine. I'll take over. and I don't know video game development, but I will learn it, and I will do my best to make it a program that's worthy of this school's reputation. So I did. For the first year, I kind of, took over the program, and I realized, hey, this is the state requiring us to actually do some things, so I'm going to actually teach those things. And I got a lot of pushback from students because they hadn't signed up to actually do work. They had heard that this program was just kind of a joke for years and years and years before I showed up, and then I showed up and said, hey, we're going to actually do what we're supposed to do, and they said, nah, doesn't sound awesome. They said it a lot worse than that, but that was basically the gist of it. No, this is terrible. But I had fun. So I was teaching, and they were learning. Some of them learned that they were really good at doing 3D art. Some of them learned that they were pretty good programmers. And hopefully from at least that batch of students, maybe 1 or 2 will go on to actually do video game development or design. I don't have a lot of hope for them, but maybe they will. So because nobody really understood what the program was supposed to do, and very few people in education understand how computers work, and since I was a programming teacher, I pretty much got to design and build my own program from the ground up. Sure, we had state requirements that we got to meet, but the end goal of this program that I was trying to build was a program where students would go through for 4 years, and then at the end of it, they would have a full video game, or at least a video game prototype that them and their friends had worked on. And so I got to design every aspect of it. We learned 3D modeling, we learned programming, we got Unity involved into the curriculum. And all of that was great, and everybody that came in was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you're actually doing this. And I brought in, because of a situation that kind of happened with another teacher, I brought in this professional animator, 3D modeler. His wife worked at a university, and he was basically like, yeah, students at university don't always get this quality of education, and they're getting it for free. This is amazing. I wish I had had this when I was in school. So, we were doing something right if someone of the professional field is coming in and going, oh, wow, this is incredible. So I got to design and build this whole thing. It was a lot of fun. I loved that I poured my heart and soul into it. I learned everything that I needed to learn to help students along. Students would learn things and then, share them with me, and we would grow and learn together. And ultimately, by the time I left the program, after 3 years of being there, the first group of students had developed games, or prototypes of games at least. And one student actually, and she knows who she is, went on to try to get an interview with Activision for an internship in her first year of college. And because of her experience in my classes with the 3D modeling suite and with Unity, Activision basically told them, hey, you are overqualified for this internship position, but let me get your contact info, because we'll contact you when you're a junior and you can actually come and work for us and hire us on. And I was like, that's amazing. So congratulations if you're watching this video and you made it this far. Congratulations. Well done. You were a brilliant student. I look forward to the games that you create. But yeah, that was the program that I was trying to build. But after the second year that I was working in it, I realized I was going to need a little bit more pull, and I was going to need to find out a little bit about what was going on behind the scenes to really make this program like I thought it needed to be. To really fulfill the dream of having students create video games, I was going to need to peek behind the curtain. And what I saw when I peeked behind that curtain was a mess. Was an absolute mess. So when I looked behind the curtain and got into a little bit of administrative work, so I became this program coordinator, which basically meant that I oversaw the magnet program, my particular magnet program, where the game development track was positioned under. And I realized a couple of things right off the bat. The first was that they treated the program like a dropout program. So like I said earlier in the video, the school was all magnet. So everybody had to apply there. It was a complete lottery to get in. Once you were in, though, you had particular requirements that you had to maintain in order to stay. Certain GPA requirements, certain class values. Like if you were in a computer science course, you had to maintain a semester grade of a C or higher to stay in that course. Basically, it was pretty reasonable, but we wanted to make sure that the quality of education we were providing was consistent with our reputation of being the best in the area. And so we put these requirements on students. They knew that before they showed up to the school. That was part of the reason why they would come to the school. The problem was that those students who came into the school and couldn't keep those requirements, couldn't keep the semester grade of a C in their math and science classes or their CS class, rather than what the contract that they had to sign said, which is they would go back to their home school in their home location, the school district thought that made them look bad. And so they were pretty insistent that students who got into the school could not leave the school. Now, in certain cases, they did leave for drug offenses or for threats against teachers, they would go, but that happened very rarely. And so we had this academic standard that we were telling people that we have, but not actually following up with. Which, okay, whatever, I get it. Second chances are important. You don't want to just throw a kid out who's doing well in all of the other courses if they just can't cut the ones in their magnet program. That's fine. The problem was that there wasn't a standard diploma at this school, and so what they were doing with all of the students who couldn't cut it in their particular magnet program was they were taking them from that program and then putting them into the program that I was overseeing. And some of the students were really smart and they were really good. They just struggled with a couple of different classes. But most of the students who had dropped out were students that didn't really have the mentality or the ability to perform at the level that the school required, which isn't a bad thing. Remember, they would take a year and a half of college with them into college. So you're dealing with students who are taking college level classes at 14 and 15. And when I went to the school, I was taking calculus as a 16, 17-year-old, and that kicked my butt. Like, that was the hardest math I've ever done. And I barely scraped by with like a 69.5. So I understand what it was like for those kids when they struggled with one or two classes, but not everybody can perform at that level, and that's okay. But when the school district would not let us send those students who weren't able to perform at that level back to their home school to free up spots for students who could perform at that level, then you start getting a problem. And when my program in particular was being treated as this dropout program, oh, you couldn't make it over here, so we're going to put you over here where classes are a lot easier. And that was kind of a district level thing. Administration kind of made that decision. Okay, that's something to fight against. And I did fight against that. I tried to raise the GPA requirement to match the other 3 programs at the school, because there was a full GPA point higher. But that got shot down because we needed to have this dropout program, essentially, from the administration's words. They didn't call it a dropout program. I want to be clear about that. They did not call it that. But everybody at the school, all the teachers, all the students, they all knew if you were starting another one, that was a dropout program for you. And we were keeping you around because we couldn't get rid of you. And that was kind of a well-known, not really talked about fact among the faculty. And it was something that was brought up constantly among students because the nature of the school created this elitist mindset. And so anybody that was in that 4th program, my program, they were treated as an academically lesser person, like they weren't doing as hard curriculum. And the unfortunate fact of that is that for years before I showed up, that program hadn't done anything. They really hadn't. We had an architectural and design and drafting course, and it was awesome. It had great potential. But for years before that, it was kind of a joke. There weren't really deadlines. The quality of the education for people that learned was fantastic. But the majority of people that went through that track didn't do anything, and they still passed because administration made it clear, hey, this is for people who can't cut it in the other ones. They can't fail out of here. And in our photography courses, nothing was being taught. They were supposed to learn photography and setting up a business and Photoshop, but they weren't doing those things because they had a teacher who didn't care and was just passing them along. And then I showed up and took over one of the branches of this program, and I started actually making them do work. And then I became an administrator of sorts and started realizing what the heck was going on, and it started to wear me down. Because I was having to fight this uphill battle for the sake of my students and the sake of the vision that I wanted. And the school was completely content to not let that vision happen. They were completely content to remain the status quo and keep students who couldn't cut it. Now there's to give them a dropout way so they can keep their numbers up. But I fought. And for my students, I was able to do a lot of things. I set the bar, hey, there's a certain level of standard. You have to achieve well. I expected professionalism because we were trying to build this course to be a technical education. The point of it was to prevent students from needing to go to college in order to get jobs and skills. And ultimately, everybody has to go to college these days, but we were doing our best to make it so that when they got to college, they would already have the certifications, they would already have the skills so that college would be easy, and then they would have a leg up on their competition once they got out of college, so they could get better jobs. So I started raising the standard in my program, and it went great. It went great for a little bit. I got a lot of pushback for the first year and a half. You know, not everybody got an A anymore, and that made some parents upset. And that made some students really upset because their GPA started going down, but it was a professional course and we were teaching programming and they were having to do animations all by the state standards. So I was just enforcing that we were going to do that. And if they didn't do it or didn't do it well, their grades reflected that because I wanted them to develop the skills and put the time and effort in. And so after the first year or so, they did. Students started learning. They started growing. The student before, right, was told she was overqualified for an internship as a college student because of her experience and stuff she'd already done. So the program was working, but administration wasn't willing to take the extra steps and go forward. They weren't willing to actually tell people, hey, this is difficult and you have to cut it. And if you can't cut it, well, you have to go to your homeschool. And they weren't willing to enforce that contract. And so when students would fail out of my course because they heard video game development and the reputation was still that people were playing video games instead of actually doing work, they signed up for the course. And they didn't listen to me when I told them, hey, this is going to be hard now because I'm running the show. And it's going to be actually teaching you what you need to know. Instead of sending them back to their homeschool, they took them from my program and they moved them to one of the other programs as a continuous dropout cycle because it was too hard for them here. So we're going to move them over here so our numbers stay up. And then we got a new photography teacher and she came in and did amazing things and started teaching stuff, and she started experiencing the same thing that I was experiencing. She had raised up the bar of her program to actually include real photography and teaching the real photography skills. And then administration was overloading her with all of these dropouts from the other programs who didn't care about photography. They just wanted to stay at the school. And this administration was more than happy to load her up with 30 plus students in a class just so they didn't have to send a student back to their homeschool to get the education that was just fine at their homeschool. Now, all of this, I imagine, sounds pretty harsh, if we're being honest. It sounds elitist. And you know what? It is. I'll be honest, it is. It's a school designed for students who can handle college-level stuff. Not everybody is there at the high school age. Some people aren't even there after high school. But the fact of the matter is that was what the school was saying that they were providing. And then they were behaving in a completely different way. And the lack of support from administration, the lack of support from really only a couple of parents. Most parents understood. Most parents were okay with the fact that, hey, my student doesn't have an A in your class, what's going on? When I would explain what we were doing, they would be like, oh, that's impressive. I guess I get it. You know, it's hard. They can study a little bit more, but they're learning a real skill. And I am okay with them not having an A now that you've explained it. But some parents couldn't accept the fact that their kid wasn't necessarily cut out for game development. So as the students were figuring out whether or not they were capable of doing the work, I had a lot of students just go, hey, this is not what I want. And I would help them have the conversation with their parents that this isn't what we signed up for. This isn't what we thought it was. Can we go back to our home school? And parents were reluctant because the school was so good that it was kind of like a mini Harvard effect. You know, if you went to Harvard, people think you're amazing, even though you might not be. Well, if you go to that high school, the local effect was, oh my gosh, that person must be really smart, and it prepares them for college. And in fact, it prepares them for college in such a way that many people go to college and basically tell us college was a piece of cake compared to high school. So, you know, parents were reluctant to pull their kids out of the program. But one or two in particular really they just attacked. And when I was dealing with the resistance from administration, trying to make the program respectable, these parents coming in and attacking the work that we were doing, that their student wasn't doing well at because they weren't putting in the time or effort, or they weren't studying, or they just didn't get it, but blaming me, it really wore down. And I think it wore me down a little bit more because I had poured so much of my heart and soul into building this program. And I had then started pouring my heart and soul into the YouTube channel to further help my students. I like all of these courses videos, they're to help them get better. Because if they didn't understand it when I explained it in class, they could go watch one of these videos. And I would stay after school once a week and open my room during the week every day for them to do after school tutoring or peer-to-peer tutoring during lunch. And there were students that took advantage of that, but the students whose parents attacked didn't. And that didn't really matter to them. All of these things that I was doing, what mattered was their student wasn't performing well, and that was my fault. And then, there's the obvious student resistance of, hey, we're having to do work and we don't want to do work. But I don't blame them, because when I was a high school student, I didn't want to do work either. So I don't know. I don't know really what got me down. I think it was a combination of all the extra time and effort that I was putting into it, all of the resistance that I was encountering from students and faculty who didn't want to see me raise the standards of the program for one reason or another, right? I had a good man, he was a good man and the football coach, and he made a comment that if we raised the standard of the program to what I wanted it to be, he would not have a football team because none of his players could meet those GPA requirements to be at this school. So there were different reasons for pushback from people. And all of that was generally okay because of the students that loved it, and the students that I loved, who would come in and they would want to learn and they would want to work, and they would, even if they weren't necessarily passionate about it themselves, the passion that I brought was enough to get them to go, I want to do this because it's fun. Even if I never do it outside of high school again, I want to do this because it's fun. Those students made it worth it. Until one fateful afternoon when I knew that I was done. I was walking from my classroom, and when I was walking from my classroom, I remember thinking, I need a drink. I need a drink. Not I want a drink, not I'm excited to go home and try this new bottle of alcohol that we had. It wasn't that. It was like I need it, because if I don't have it, I will be completely stressed out and I'm going to lose my mind. And so I kept thinking that on the way home. I kept thinking, I need a drink. I have to have a drink. If I don't have a drink, I might kill myself. And I'm not a suicidal person by nature. So that thought, when it entered my head, was a huge, huge warning and red flag for me that I needed to do something. And I needed to think about why I really wanted this drink. And so when I got home, I didn't have the drink. I instead did some introspection and looked into what was going on, what was causing me to say, you know what, I need to drink my problems away. And I realized that a lot of what I was encountering, the stress of trying to fight this uphill battle with an administration and district that didn't really seem to care, and faculty that wanted things to stay the same, and with parents who wanted their kids to succeed, but their kids weren't capable and they couldn't handle that. All of these things kind of wrapped into one made me realize that though I love teaching, if it was going to cause me to need a drink at the end of the day, it wasn't something that I should continue doing. So here's the thing though, I wish I could say that I was the only one. I was the only teacher ever to get this stressed out. But as I did some research, I realized that there is a huge problem in academia because teachers are drunkards and we're substance abusers. And the reason we do is because this job stresses us out. And the job stresses us out because we're not paid well and we're not really appreciated. And when it comes down to it, even if a student isn't capable, it's not their fault, it's our fault. According to the state, according to parents, according to administration sometimes. All that stress, that constant feeling like you're not good enough, that does two things to teachers. It burns us out in less than 5 years. And in Florida, I don't know if this is a national statistic, but a quote that got put out a lot of times was, if you're a teacher and you make it past year 5, you're probably going to do it for life. But the vast majority of teachers burn out within 5 years from the stress of dealing with low pay and parents and students that don't want to learn, though you want to teach. And this causes a lot of great teachers, myself included, to leave the public education profession. Now, I just want to give this disclaimer. None of the teachers, as far as I know, were substance abusers. And none of the ones that I knew and worked with were drunks. They weren't longing for that drink on Sunday night so they could get through the week and drink again on Friday night to drink away the stresses. They weren't like that, but that is a common thing. If you look it up, if you look up alcohol in education, you'll see there's a lot of confessions from teachers just like me who realize that in order to do their job that they love, they have to drink their stress away. And I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to do that. So I spent 3 years of my life building this awesome program. This program that was accomplishing the goals that I had set forth for it. And I spent 3 years of my life on it. But I got so burned out and I got so stressed out that I was literally thinking of killing myself instead of going to work. So I quit. I made an exit plan. I didn't tell people I was interviewing. I started interviewing. I interviewed for a couple of jobs before I decided I was going to go the software development route. I went with a company called Reviture. I'll do a video on them later about those experiences because I don't know if I would do them again, but they definitely were worth the experience so that I could get this new job. And I'm a lot better now. As soon as I made up my mind to quit teaching, my stress went away because I realized that at the end of the year, at the end of the school year, one way or the other, I was done and I didn't care anymore. So I still performed what I needed to perform. I still taught my students, but I knew that I was not going to be there to continue their education. And that kind of hurt because I had sold them this amazing program. I had told them what I was going to teach them and what they were going to learn. And I was so excited to do that for them. Just to have the stresses of the job make me go back on what I loved and what I wanted to do for them. But I quit, and I'm better now. I really am. Actually, I'm so much less stressed than I used to be, and I can leave work at work. And the good news is, with the YouTube channel that I started while I was teaching, and now you're watching a video on, I can continue teaching those who want to learn. Whatever it is they want to learn, as long as I know it, I'm gonna teach it. So for my students, if you've made it this far, know that I'm sorry I left you. I'm sorry I left you, but I told you I would tell you why, and that's why. It wasn't necessarily you guys. It wasn't any one particular student. There was a lot more to it that was going on, and if you saw me at the end of my year teaching, you knew that I was rough. You knew that it was rough. But as long as you guys want to keep learning, I'm going to keep making educational content for this channel so that you guys can learn. Because at the end of the day, I am a teacher.